We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The industrial district's sodium lights cast long shadows as Leonard Mills made his way home, his steel-toed boots scuffing against cracked sidewalks. His hands, calloused from years of operating machinery, still bore the stubborn stains of machine oil, despite his thorough scrubbing in the plant's washroom. The autumn wind cut through his worn jacket, carrying the familiar scent of metal shavings and industrial cleaner that seemed permanently embedded in his clothes. The elevator in their apartment building wheezed and groaned as it carried him to the fourth floor. Leonard checked his watch. 7:45 p.m. Another 12-hour shift done. Another day's wages earned. At 45, his body protested these long hours more than it used to, but the thought of Christopher's college applications sitting on the kitchen table kept him going. The sound of rapid typing greeted him as he unlocked the apartment door. Christopher sat at the kitchen table, his laptop casting a blue glow across his face. The moment Leonard stepped in, his son's hands flew across the keyboard, and the screen snapped shut with an abruptness that made both of them flinch. "Hey, Dad." Christopher's voice cracked slightly, his eyes darting to the closed laptop. "You're home early." Leonard hung his jacket on the hook by the door, noting how his son's shoulders remained tense. "Actually running right on schedule, kiddo." He tried to keep his tone light, though something about Christopher's behavior set off warning bells. "Thompson let us off, right at 7 for once." The kitchen showed signs of a solitary dinner, a single plate in the dish rack, an empty microwave container in the trash. "Your mom working late again?" Christopher nodded, drumming his fingers on the laptop's surface. "Yeah, she's showing a house in Oakwood Heights. Said she might not be back until after 9. He paused, then added quickly, "There's leftover lasagna in the fridge if you're hungry." Leonard opened the refrigerator, finding the familiar glass container with Eleanor's neat handwriting on a post-it note. "Heat for 2 minutes." Even in her absence, she maintained these small gestures of care that had marked their 20 years together. Yet lately, these notes felt more like automated responses than genuine connection. "Everything okay, Chris?" Leonard asked, placing the container in the microwave. "You seemed pretty quick to close that laptop when I came in." A flash of something, guilt? Anxiety? Crossed Christopher's face before he managed a weak smile. "Yeah, Dad. Just homework. Working on my college essays, actually." He gathered his things, tucking the laptop under his arm. "Think I'll finish up in my room. Got a calculus test tomorrow, too." Leonard watched his son retreat down the hallway, noting how the boy's usual confident stride had been replaced by something more hesitant. He settled into his recliner, the fabric worn smooth in places from years of use, and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in his stomach. The apartment felt different lately, quieter, tenser, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. The microwave beeped, but Leonard didn't immediately get up. Instead, he pulled out his phone, checking Eleanor's recent messages. Their conversations had become increasingly transactional. Working late, showing a house, left dinner in fridge. Gone were the random midday texts asking about his lunch break or sharing funny stories about difficult clients. From down the hall came the muffled sound of Christopher's voice, too low to make out words but carrying an urgent tone that seemed at odds with homework discussions. Leonard considered checking on him but stopped himself. At 17, maybe his son deserved some privacy. Still, something about the way Christopher had looked at him, a mixture of avoidance and what seemed like pity, stayed with him as he ate his reheated dinner alone at the kitchen table. Eleanor's shoes joined his by the door just past 10, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she moved through the darkened apartment. She smelled of unfamiliar perfume when she kissed his cheek, something expensive and new, not the vanilla scent she'd worn for years. "Sorry I'm so late," she whispered, setting her purse down. The clients had a million questions about the property. "You know how it goes with first-time buyers." Leonard nodded, not mentioning that he'd driven past Oakwood Heights on his way home and seen no open house signs, no realtor cars parked along those wealthy streets. Instead, he asked, "Good commission at least?" "We'll see," she replied vaguely, already heading toward their bedroom. "I'm exhausted. Don't stay up too late, honey." He watched her disappear down the hallway, the distance between them measured in more than just feet. The perfect little life they'd built seemed to be developing hairline cracks, so fine they were almost invisible, but Leonard could feel them spreading beneath the surface, threatening the foundation of everything he thought he knew. The fluorescent lights of Warehouse Solutions hummed overhead as Leonard checked his time card. 6 p.m. sharp. The evening shift stretched ahead of him like a desert. 8 hours of mindless inventory work that would help pad Christopher's college fund. The warehouse air carried the perpetual scent of cardboard and forklift exhaust, a sharp contrast to the metallic atmosphere of his day job at the manufacturing plant. Mills. Just the man I was looking for. Kent Hurd's voice boomed across the loading dock. The supervisor, a barrel-chested man with salt and pepper hair, waved Leonard over to his station. Got a special project tonight. Need your eye for detail. Leonard wound his way through the maze of storage racks, nodding to familiar faces. Kent had become something of a friend over the past year, one of the few people who understood the grinding reality of working 2 jobs to stay afloat. Special project? Leonard asked, accepting the clipboard Kent handed him. Nothing involving heights, I hope. My knees aren't what they used to be. Kent chuckled, but his eyes held a hint of concern. Nah, inventory reconciliation and Section D numbers aren't adding up, and you're the most thorough counter we've got. He paused, studying Leonard's face. You look beat, Len. Everything all right at home? The question caught Leonard off guard. He'd thought he'd been hiding his worries better than that. What makes you ask? 20 years of marriage myself, Kent replied, leading them toward the break room. You get a sense for when someone's carrying more than just physical fatigue. Coffee. Leonard accepted the styrofoam cup. The bitter break room brew a poor substitute for real caffeine. Eleanor's been different lately, working late more often. Real estate must be booming, but he trailed off, not sure how to voice his suspicions without sounding paranoid. Kent's expression shifted subtly. Funny you should mention real estate. Trina, my wife, mentioned seeing Eleanor's car at the Meadows subdivision last Wednesday. Said she was sure it was her because of that distinctive red color and the custom license plate. The coffee turned bitter in Leonard's mouth. The Meadows? That's nowhere near her usual territory. She told me she was showing properties in Riverside that day. Could be expanding her territory, Ken offered, but his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. Though Trina said she saw her there again yesterday, around noon. Nice area, the Meadows. Way out of my price range. Before Leonard could process this information, the warehouse intercom crackled to life. Second shift, stations please. Inventory count beginning in 5 minutes. Kent clapped him on the shoulder. Listen, Len, if you ever need to talk. He hesitated, then added, Trina and I host a poker night every other Saturday. Nothing fancy, just a few friends unwinding. You should join us sometime. Leonard managed a grateful nod, his mind still stuck on the image of Eleanor's red Mazda in the Meadows, a subdivision so exclusive it had its own security gate. Thanks, Kent. I might take you up on that. The next few hours passed in a blur of inventory sheets and barcode scanners. Leonard threw himself into the mindless task of counting and recounting, trying to drown out the questions multiplying in his mind. Why would Eleanor lie about where she was showing houses? And why the Meadows, of all places? During their midnight break, Leonard found himself studying his phone, thumb hovering over Eleanor's message thread. The last text from her had come hours ago. Working late again. Don't wait up. He typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple, hope your showing goes well. Her reply came surprisingly quick. Thanks, honey. Just finished. Heading to the office to file paperwork. Leonard checked the time. 12:15 a.m. What real estate office was open at this hour? He pocketed his phone without responding, the weight of unasked questions settling heavy in his chest. The rest of his shift passed with excruciating slowness. Kent stopped by his station periodically, each time looking like he wanted to say something more but thinking better of it. By the time Leonard clocked out at 2 a.m., his body ached not just from the physical labor, but from the emotional weight of his growing suspicions. The drive home took him past the turnoff for the Meadows. On impulse, he slowed down, considering taking the exit. But what would he find? What was he looking for? In the end, He drove past, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Eleanor was asleep when he got home, or at least pretending to be. Her breathing seemed too measured, too careful for natural sleep. Leonard stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her shoulder in the dim light filtering through the blinds. 20 years of marriage, and suddenly he felt like he was looking at a stranger. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Leonard sat at the computer, logging into their joint bank account. Eleanor was at another showing, this time in Riverside Heights, according to her hasty goodbye, and Christopher had mumbled something about studying at the library with his girlfriend Mercedes. The familiar online banking interface loaded, and Leonard began scrolling through their recent transactions. Everything looked normal at first. His paychecks from both jobs, regular bills, grocery store runs. Then he noticed it. A series of large withdrawals he couldn't explain. $3,000 here, $5,000 there. All made during business hours when he was at the plant. The front door opened, startling him. Eleanor breezed in, designer handbags swinging from her arm. She wore a new blazer he didn't recognize, the kind of clothing that belonged in the window displays of stores they used to walk past but never enter. "Honey," Leonard called out, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Can you come look at something?" Eleanor paused in the kitchen doorway, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her new iPhone. Another recent acquisition he didn't remember discussing. "Can it wait? I need to send some emails to clients." "It's about the bank account," Leonard said, turning the screen slightly so she could see it. "There are some withdrawals I don't recognize. Pretty large ones." Something flickered across Eleanor's face, too quick to catch, before she waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, those? Commission deposits and withdrawals. You know how real estate transactions work." She was already typing on her phone, barely glancing at the screen. "The money comes in. We have to move it around for escrow, closing costs, all that." "Since when do we handle escrow through our personal account?" Leonard pressed, remembering the strict financial procedures she'd explained when she first started in real estate. "I thought your firm had separate accounts for that." "New policy," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Makes it easier to track individual agent transactions." "Really, Leonard, it's all perfectly normal in this business." She glanced at her watch. "I need to make some calls. We can discuss this later if you're still concerned." Movement in the hallway caught Leonard's attention. Christopher stood there, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Their son had gotten home so quietly neither of them had noticed. "Everything okay?" Christopher asked, his voice unusually tight. "I heard you talking about bank accounts." "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Eleanor cut in before Leonard could respond. "Your father's just confused about some work transactions. Nothing to worry about." She turned back to Leonard, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'll explain everything properly later, okay? Right now, I really need to handle these client matters." Leonard watched her retreat to their bedroom, the click of her heels against the hardwood floor echoing with finality. Christopher lingered in the hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he used to do as a child when he had something to confess. "Dad," Christopher started, then seemed to think better of it. "Never mind. I should get back to studying. Mercedes is waiting for me to video call." But later that night, as Leonard passed by Christopher's room, he heard his son's voice through the partially open door. "I can't keep doing this, Mercedes. The lies are eating me up." Leonard stood frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding. Christopher's next words were too quiet to make out, but the anguish in his tone was unmistakable. Leonard wanted to burst in, demand answers, shake the truth loose from the web of secrets that seemed to be suffocating their family. Instead, he forced himself to walk away, each step feeling like lead. In bed that night, Eleanor's breathing once again too measured to be natural, Leonard stared at the ceiling and tried to piece together the puzzle his life had become. The unexplained withdrawals, the new clothes, the mysterious showings in expensive neighborhoods, Christopher's guilty looks and whispered phone calls. Somewhere in this tangle of inconsistencies lay a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start asking harder questions. But for now, he lay awake in the dark, listening to his wife pretend to sleep beside him, wondering when exactly their perfect illusion had begun to crack. Leonard sat in his car outside the manufacturing plant, studying the leave request form in his hands. Taking a Wednesday off felt strange after 15 years of perfect attendance, but Kent's revelation about Eleanor's car at the Meadows wouldn't leave him alone. He'd spent 3 sleepless nights turning over possibilities in his mind, each explanation less convincing than the last. The autumn morning air bit through his jacket as he waited, parked 2 blocks from their apartment building. At 8:45 a.m., Eleanor's red Mazda pulled out of the parking garage. Leonard counted to 30 before easing his sedan into traffic, maintaining 3 cars' distance between them. Eleanor drove with purpose, taking routes Leonard had never seen her use before. They passed through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, the modest storefronts giving way to boutique shops and manicured parks. When she turned into Willow Grove, Leonard's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't just outside her usual territory. It was in another league entirely. The security guard at the gate waved Eleanor through without checking her ID. Leonard held his breath, expecting to be stopped, but the guard merely nodded as his car passed. Either Eleanor was a regular here, or he pushed away the thought, focusing on keeping his distance. The houses grew larger, more ornate, each set back from the street behind carefully landscaped gardens. Eleanor's Mazda slowed near the end of a curved drive, turning into the circular driveway of a magnificent colonial-style house. Leonard pulled to the curb half a block away, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the large bay windows, he could see into what appeared to be a living room. The furniture alone probably cost more than his annual salary. Movement caught his eye at 2 young boys, maybe 8 or 10 years old, racing toward the front door. Eleanor stepped out of her car, arms wide, as the children crashed into her with familiar enthusiasm. "No," Leonard whispered to himself. "This can't." His denial died in his throat as a tall man appeared in the doorway. Even at this distance, Leonard recognized Stuart Patterson from the business magazine covers at the plant's break room, the venture capitalist whose success story was supposedly inspiring to working men like Leonard. There was nothing inspiring about the way Patterson greeted Eleanor with a kiss, his hands settling naturally at the small of her back as they walked inside. Leonard sat in his car, numb, as pieces of the puzzle crashed into place. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the unexplained expenses, the guilt in Christopher's eyes. His phone buzzed, a text from Eleanor, "Working late tonight. Big showing in Riverside Heights." Leonard stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting his own haunted expression. The perfect life he thought he had built was nothing but a house of cards, and he was finally seeing the empty space beneath. A school bus rumbled past, and Leonard watched the 2 boys' backpacks bouncing as they ran to catch it. Their dark hair and the way they moved reminded him of Christopher at that age. The thought hit him like a physical blow. These weren't just some random kids. The timing, their age, the way they'd greeted Eleanor. He started his car with trembling hands, needing to escape before someone noticed him. As he drove past the house, he caught a glimpse of Eleanor through the window, laughing at something Patterson had said. She looked younger somehow, more vibrant than she'd been at home in years. The security guard raised an eyebrow as Leonard's car approached the exit. "Everything all right, sir? You seemed a bit lost there." "Just turned around," Leonard managed, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Beautiful neighborhood." "That it is," the guard agreed. "Though most folks who live here don't drive." He glanced at Leonard's weathered sedan, domestic models. Leonard nodded, not trusting himself to speak again. He drove aimlessly for hours, calling in sick to his evening warehouse shift. Kent would understand. He'd been the one to set this revelation in motion with his casual mention of Eleanor's car. When he finally returned home that evening, Christopher was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around him. He looked up as Leonard entered, then quickly away, that now familiar guilt shadowing his features. "Dad? You're home early." "Am I?" Leonard asked quietly. "Or am I just finally seeing what's been right in front of me?" Christopher's face went pale, but before either could say more, they heard Eleanor's key in the lock. She breezed in, designer bag swinging, that same vibrant energy Leonard had seen earlier now carefully contained. "Oh, Leonard, I didn't expect you home so early. How was work?" The lie came easily to her lips, her smile never wavering. Leonard looked between his wife and son, wondering how many other lies he'd accepted without question over the years. "Fine," he said, the word tasting like ashes in his mouth. "Everything's fine." The business card felt heavy in Leonard's hand. Raymond Bowers, attorney at law. Ray had been 3 years ahead of him in high school, one of the few who'd made it out of their blue-collar neighborhood to become something more. They'd kept in loose touch over the years, meeting occasionally at local baseball games. Leonard sat in Ray's modest office, the morning traffic humming beyond the windows. 2 weeks had passed since his discovery at Willow Grove, 2 weeks of watching his wife and son perform their roles in what he now recognized as an elaborate charade. "Start from the beginning," Ray said, legal pad ready. His face showed none of the shock Leonard had expected when he'd outlined the situation over the phone. Leonard pulled out a manila folder stuffed with bank statements, printed emails, and hastily scrawled notes. "I tracked the withdrawals back 6 years," he began. "They started small, amounts I wouldn't notice. But lately," Ray studied the statements, his frown deepening. "These recent withdrawals are bold. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. She's either gotten careless or she doesn't think it matters anymore if I notice," Leonard finished. "Tell me about Christopher's involvement." Leonard ran a hand over his face. "He's been visiting them, Eleanor and Patterson. The boys are his half-brothers. I followed him last weekend, saw him playing basketball with them in their driveway." The memory twisted in his gut. Patterson was there, coaching them like some kind of family man? Ray supplied gently. "Mercedes Lawson, Christopher's girlfriend. She's been pushing him to tell me the truth. I overheard them arguing about it." Leonard paused. "Her father's Judge Marcus Lawson. Could that be a problem?" Ray shook his head. "Actually, it might help. Marcus and I go way back, and his daughter's testimony about Christopher's situation could be valuable." He made several notes. "What about Patterson? What do you know about him?" "Stuart Patterson, venture capitalist. Local success story." Leonard's laugh held no humor. "Turns out he's been married to my wife for 6 years, living in Willow Grove with their twin boys." He pulled out a printout from Patterson's company website. "He's been featured in business magazines, always talking about family values and ethical investing." Ray studied the photo. "I've heard of him. His firm handles a lot of real estate investments." He looked up sharply. "Eleanor's real estate career. When did she start?" 6 years ago, Leonard said, the timing suddenly significant. "Patterson's firm probably handles all her actual transactions. The one she tells me about, the late-night showings and weekend open houses, covers for spending time with her other family," Ray finished. "And Christopher? Patterson's been buying him off. Expensive gifts, promises of a trust fund." Leonard's voice cracked. "My son knew he had brothers, knew his mother was living this whole other life, and never said a word." Ray set down his pen. "Leonard, what you're describing, it's not just infidelity. We're looking at systematic fraud, bigamy, possible financial crimes." He leaned forward. "Patterson's reputation, his business, people like him don't like scandals. He might try to buy your silence. I don't want his money." "No," Ray agreed, "but we can use that fear. Start building our case quietly. Document everything. Bank records, Christopher's gifts, Eleanor's schedule. We need proof of the timeline, the financial drain, Christopher's involvement." A knock interrupted them. Ray's secretary poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but I found those property records you asked for." She handed Ray a thick folder. "It's all there. Deed transfers, mortgage documents, everything on the Willow Grove house." Ray scanned the documents, his eyebrows rising. "Leonard, look at this. The down payment on Patterson's house. The dates match some of the first large withdrawals from your account." Leonard stared at the numbers, feeling sick. "She used our money to help buy their home?" "Better than that," Ray said grimly. "She used your money, but Patterson put the house in her name, probably trying to protect his assets, but it works in our favor." He started making notes again. "We need to move carefully. Patterson's got resources, connections, but he's also got everything to lose. His reputation, his business relationships." "What about Christopher?" Leonard asked quietly. He's 17, finishing high school. I don't want this to destroy his future. Ray's expression softened. Mercedes Lawson's been trying to get him to do the right thing. That counts for something. And if he cooperates, tells us everything. He trailed off as his phone buzzed. Excuse me, I need to take this. Leonard nodded, gathering the scattered documents. Through the office window, he watched people hurrying along the sidewalk below, all living their normal lives, unaware that his world was splintering into before and after. Ray ended his call, his face serious. That was Judge Lawson's clerk. Marcus wants to meet, unofficially. Apparently, Mercedes has told him some things that concern him. He checked his calendar. Can you come back tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock? I'll call in sick again, Leonard said, standing. Kent's been understanding about all this. Good man, Kent. Ray nodded. Keep him close. You're going to need friends when this breaks open. The high school parking lot was filling up, parents and relatives arriving for the graduation ceremony. Leonard sat in his car, watching families stream toward the auditorium in their Sunday best, carrying flowers and balloons. He left Christopher's gift, a new laptop for college, on the kitchen table that morning, unable to face another lie about where the money had come from. His phone buzzed, a text from Kent. We're here if you need backup. Leonard spotted Kent and Trina near the entrance, deliberately positioned where they could watch both doors. Ray had suggested having witnesses present, people who could testify to what happened. The familiar red Mazda pulled into a reserved spot near the front. Leonard's hands clenched as Eleanor stepped out, immaculate in a designer dress he'd never seen before. Stuart Patterson emerged from the passenger side, looking every bit the successful businessman in his tailored suit. They moved with the easy synchronization of a long-married couple, and Leonard felt bile rise in his throat. He waited until they were halfway to the entrance before getting out of his car. Christopher would be inside already, with the other graduates. Mercedes had promised to stay with him, to help him through what was coming. Eleanor, Leonard called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Several heads turned. Or should I say Mrs. Patterson? Eleanor froze. Patterson's hand tightened on her arm, but he maintained his composed expression. Mr. Mills, he said smoothly, this isn't the place for what? Leonard advanced slowly. For the truth? How long did you think you could keep this charade going? More people were stopping now, watching the drama unfold. Kent and Trina moved closer, phones discreetly recording. Leonard saw Judge Lawson emerge from the building, Mercedes at his side. Leonard, please, Eleanor hissed, her perfect facade cracking. Don't make a scene. Not at Christopher's graduation. Our son's graduation, Leonard corrected. Or does he only count as yours when you're playing house in Willow Grove with your other family? A collective gasp went up from the gathering crowd. Patterson stepped forward, his businessman's charm sliding into place. Mr. Mills, I understand you're upset. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Like you've been privately draining my accounts for 6 years? Leonard's voice rose. Using my money to buy your colonial mansion while I worked 2 jobs to save for Christopher's college? Eleanor's composure shattered. You were never enough, Leonard, she spat. Stuart could give the children everything you couldn't. Private schools, trust funds, connections. Children? Leonard laughed bitterly. You mean the twins? The sons you had with him while you were still married to me? Or do you mean Christopher, who you've been bribing to keep quiet about his half-brothers? The crowd had grown larger, phones recording the confrontation. Leonard spotted Ray Bowers at the edge of the gathering, nodding approvingly. Everything was being documented, just as they'd planned. Patterson's mask slipped, showing a flash of panic. Eleanor, we should go. Now. Running away again? Leonard asked. Like you run away every night to your real family? Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice the withdrawals, the lies, the way our son could barely look me in the eye? I gave Christopher choices you never could, Eleanor shot back. Opportunities, connections. You gave him guilt, Leonard corrected. You made him carry your secrets until they ate him alive. What kind of mother does that to her child? Judge Lawson stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. I believe, he said quietly, we should take this inside. My chambers are available. He looked at Patterson. I'm sure Mr. Patterson's lawyer would appreciate the chance to handle this discreetly. Patterson's face had gone pale. Eleanor swayed slightly, her designer heel catching on the pavement. The carefully constructed illusion of their perfect life was crumbling in front of dozens of witnesses, their phones capturing every moment. Dad. Christopher stood at the entrance, his graduation robe making him look both older and younger somehow. Mercedes held his hand, her face set in determination. I'm sorry, Christopher said, his voice breaking. I wanted to tell you so many times. Leonard felt the anger drain from him, leaving only exhaustion and grief. I know, son. We'll figure this out. He turned back to Eleanor and Patterson. But first, we're going to tell the truth. All of it. No more lies. The crowd parted as Judge Lawson led them toward the building. Leonard caught glimpses of shocked faces, whispered conversations, phones being tucked away with their damning evidence. Kent and Trina fell into step behind him, silent support as his world publicly unraveled. Eleanor's perfect mask had crumbled completely, leaving behind a stranger Leonard barely recognized. Patterson kept trying to make phone calls, but his hands shook too badly to operate his phone. Their carefully constructed house of lies was collapsing, and Leonard felt a strange sense of peace knowing that at least now, finally, everything would be in the open. The truth, he realized, had been like a picture frame hanging just a few degrees off. Once you noticed it, you couldn't see anything else. But now the frame had fallen, shattered, and whatever picture emerged from the broken pieces would at least be honest. The courthouse corridors buzzed with whispered conversations as Leonard and Ray Bowers approached Courtroom C. 3 months had passed since the graduation ceremony confrontation, and the legal machinery had ground slowly but inexorably toward this day. Remember, Ray said, adjusting his tie, Judge Lawson's reputation for fairness is legendary. Having her preside over this case is a stroke of luck we couldn't have planned better. Leonard nodded, watching Eleanor and Stuart Patterson huddle with their legal team at the other end of the hallway. Their designer suits and confident postures couldn't hide the strain showing around their eyes. The scandal had already cost Patterson several major investors. Dad. Christopher approached, Mercedes at his side. He looked older in his new charcoal suit, a gift from Kent, not Patterson. The forensic accountant's here. She says she found more accounts. Ray's eyebrows lifted. More than the ones in the Caymans? 3 in Switzerland, Mercedes added. Mom's been helping track the money trails. Judge Lawson's daughter had proven to be not just Christopher's emotional support, but a valuable asset to their case, her sharp mind catching details others missed. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Inside, Judge Erica Lawson already sat at her bench, her reputation for punctuality evident. Her eyes met Leonard's briefly as he entered, and he saw the same steady determination he'd come to recognize in her daughter. All rise. The Superior Court of the State is now in session, the Honorable Judge Erica Lawson presiding, in the matter of Mills versus Patterson. Eleanor sat with perfect posture at the defense table, but her usual mask of composure slipped when Christopher walked past without acknowledging her. Patterson's lawyer, a high-priced corporate attorney named Davidson, shuffled papers with practiced nonchalance. Your Honor, Ray began, we're prepared to present evidence of systematic financial fraud spanning 6 years, including documented instances of bigamy, wire fraud, and emotional manipulation. Davidson stood. Your Honor, my clients are prepared to offer a generous settlement that would. Counsel, Judge Lawson interrupted, her voice cutting through the courtroom. If you're suggesting we can put a price tag on 6 years of deliberate deception, you've gravely misread this court's position. Eleanor shifted in her seat. Leonard remembered how she used to fidget the same way when lying about small things early in their marriage, a tell he should have recognized sooner. The forensic accountant's testimony came first, her presentation methodical and devastating. Screen after screen showed the flow of money from Leonard's accounts through a maze of transfers, eventually funding the Patterson family's luxurious lifestyle. Mrs. Patterson, or Mrs. Mills, the accountant addressed Eleanor directly. These transactions show systematic withdrawals coordinated with Mr. Patterson's investment patterns. Would you care to explain how you managed to be in both Riverside Heights, showing houses, and in Zurich opening accounts on March 15th? Eleanor's theatrical sob didn't move Judge Lawson. Your Honor, I was just trying to provide opportunities for my children. All of your children, Mrs. Patterson? Judge Lawson's tone could have frozen mercury. Or only the ones living in Willow Grove? Christopher's testimony came next. Leonard's heart ached watching his son describe years of divided loyalties, expensive gifts with strings attached, and the growing weight of deception. Mr. Patterson told me the trust fund would set me up for life, Christopher said, his voice steady, but I had to play by his rules. Keep the secrets. Visit only when scheduled. Never tell my dad about my brothers. And how did that affect your relationship with your father? Ray asked gently. Christopher's composure cracked. I couldn't look him in the eye. He was working 2 jobs to save for my college, and I was taking gifts from the man who was stealing from him. Mercedes kept telling me it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing everything. My brothers, my mom, the future Mr. Patterson promised. Patterson's mask of confident indifference slipped during cross-examination. Davidson tried to paint him as a successful businessman who'd fallen in love with an unhappy wife, but the evidence told a different story. Mr. Patterson, Ray probed, how many other dual families have you maintained over the years? The question hung in the air. Patterson's face went pale. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. The court notes the defendant's refusal to answer, Judge Lawson stated. Mr. Bowers, proceed. By day's end, the pattern was clear. Eleanor and Patterson's carefully constructed facade had crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. Judge Lawson's ruling was unequivocal. This court finds the defendant's actions constitute not merely fraud but a calculated scheme to exploit and manipulate both financial and familial bonds. The evidence shows not only bigamy and financial crimes, but a profound breach of trust that has impacted multiple lives. She fixed Eleanor with a stern gaze. Mrs. Patterson, your attempts to justify your actions as maternal concern ring hollow when viewed against the documented emotional manipulation of your eldest son. This court cannot and will not condone such behavior. The final judgment was comprehensive, full financial restitution, including the Willow Grove house, criminal charges for fraud and bigamy, and a clear path for Leonard to begin rebuilding his life. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, but Kent and Trina ran interference, shepherding Leonard and Christopher to their car. Ray handled the press with practiced ease. Justice was served today. That's all we'll say for now. In the car, Christopher finally broke down. Dad, I'm so sorry. All those years. Leonard pulled his son close. We're going to be okay. No more lies between us. That's what matters now. The Willow Grove house felt different with moving boxes stacked in the foyer. Leonard sat at the kitchen island, watching Christopher sort through years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep and what to let go. I found these, Christopher said quietly, placing a stack of photos on the counter. They showed him with the twins' birthday parties, basketball games, holiday celebrations. I don't know if you want me to. They're your brothers, Chris, Leonard replied, studying the images of the boys who shared his son's smile. That doesn't change just because of what your mother and Patterson did. Mercedes looked up from the box she was organizing. The twins' grandparents called again. They want to maintain contact with Chris, separate from everything else. The past month had brought revelations that tested them all. Christopher had finally shared the full story. How Patterson had orchestrated everything, using Eleanor to target hard-working men like Leonard, building his fortune on stolen dreams. I thought the trust fund was real, Christopher admitted, sitting heavily on a bar stool. Patterson showed me documents, statements, said all I had to do was play along, keep his perfect family image intact. His laugh held no humor. Mercedes kept telling me something wasn't right, but I wanted to believe him. We all wanted to believe, Leonard said. Your mother was very good at making lies feel true. Mercedes touched Christopher's shoulder. You were a kid caught between impossible choices. What matters is you finally chose the truth. The doorbell rang, Kent and Trina arriving with pizza and moving supplies. They'd been rocks through everything, their steady support never wavering. Ray called, Kent announced, setting down the pizza boxes. Patterson's other victims are coming forward. Seems Eleanor wasn't his first partner in these schemes. Trina started pulling plates from a box. The support group idea is gaining traction. 3 more families reached out today. Leonard looked around the spacious kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. This place is too big for just Chris and me. But as a community center, the zoning board already approved the change of use, Mercedes added. Her internship with Ray's firm had given her valuable experience with municipal regulations. We can start renovations next month. Christopher opened another box, then stopped suddenly. Dad, look at this. He pulled out a framed photo, Leonard and Eleanor on their wedding day, both so young and full of hope. Was any of it real? Leonard studied the image. Parts of it were. The love I felt, the family we built, that was real. Your mother's choices don't change that, or who you are, Mercedes added firmly. You're not defined by their lies. The evening settled into a rhythm of sorting, sharing pizza, and making plans. Kent and Christopher tackled the garage while Trina and Mercedes organized donations for the future community center. Leonard found himself in Patterson's former home office, now cleared of its expensive furniture and pretensions. Still feels strange, Kent said from the doorway. Being here, knowing what went on. Leonard nodded. But we're making something good from it. A place where other families can heal, learn to trust again. Speaking of trust, Kent grinned. Trina mentioned meeting someone at the victim support group. A social worker named Grace. Says she'd be perfect to help run the center's counseling program. Kent, just saying. Life goes on, Lynn. You're allowed to find happiness again. 1 year later, the Willow Grove Community Center for Families buzzed with activity. The colonial mansion had been transformed, its formal rooms now warm, welcoming spaces where healing could begin. Leonard stood in the garden, watching Christopher and Mercedes lead a youth support group under the old oak tree. They're good with the kids, Grace Singh observed, joining him by the fountain. Her dark eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd seen both the worst and best of humanity in her years as a social worker. They understand what it's like to rebuild trust, Leonard replied. Mercedes especially. She never gave up on Chris, even when he was too deep in the lies to see clearly. The afternoon sun caught the simple silver band on Grace's hand, a recent addition that still made Leonard smile when he noticed it. Their relationship had grown naturally, built on shared understanding and genuine connection rather than illusion. A familiar car pulled into the parking lot, Kent and Trina arriving for the weekly volunteer coordination meeting. They'd become the backbone of the center's operations, their steady reliability a counterpoint to the chaos many clients were facing. Ray called, Grace said, checking her phone. Eleanor's parole hearing is next month. She's been writing to Christopher again. Leonard watched his son with the group of teenagers, seeing how he'd grown into his role as a mentor. What did Chris say? He's thinking about it. Says everyone deserves a chance at redemption, but it has to start with truth. The wisdom in that statement caught Leonard off guard. When had his son become so insightful? Dad. Christopher waved him over. Come meet Jamie. His story. It's a lot like ours. The teenager looked up warily, clutching a manila folder similar to the one Leonard had brought to Ray's office that first day. Leonard sat on the garden bench, recognizing the mix of pain and hope in the boy's eyes. The hardest part, Leonard said gently, is learning to trust again. But you don't have to do it alone. Grace squeezed his shoulder as she headed inside to prepare for her afternoon counseling session. Through the windows, Leonard could see Kent setting up chairs for the evening's support group meeting. Trina arranged coffee and cookies while Mercedes organized information packets for new families. The center had become more than just a place for victims of fraud. It was a testament to resilience, a proof that broken trust could be rebuilt into something stronger. The lies that had shattered his family had led to truth that helped others heal. Sometimes, Grace had said when they first met, what looks like an ending is really a beginning. Looking at his rebuilt life, his stronger relationship with Christopher, his deepening bond with Grace, the community they'd created from the ashes of deception, Leonard finally understood the truth in those words. His family might be smaller now, but it was real, built on honesty and trust rather than illusion and lies. The afternoon sun warmed the garden as Leonard listened to Jamie's story, offering the understanding that only comes from walking a similar path. Around them, the center hummed with life and healing. a reminder that even the deepest wounds could become foundations for something meaningful and true. Epilogue. 10 years later. The autumn sun painted long shadows across the Willow Grove Community Center's expanded campus. What had started as a single colonial mansion had grown into a sprawling complex, with 3 additional buildings housing counseling services, legal aid offices, and educational facilities. The original house, where Leonard's life had unraveled a decade ago, now served as both the center's administrative hub and a permanent reminder that healing was possible. Leonard Mills, now in his mid-50s, stood at his office window watching new families arrive for the center's weekly support group. His hair had grayed at the temples, but the weathered hands that had once bore machine oil stains now carried the confidence of a man who'd rebuilt his life on his own terms. "The Thompson case files are ready for review," Grace Singmills said, entering his office. 7 years of marriage had deepened their connection, her practical wisdom complementing his hard-earned understanding of betrayal and recovery. As the center's lead counselor, she'd helped hundreds of families navigate the aftermath of similar schemes. "How's their daughter holding up?" Leonard asked, turning from the window. "Better, now that she knows she's not alone. Christopher's working with her. Says she reminds him of himself at that age." Christopher, now 37, had transformed his own painful experience into a career helping others. After completing his law degree with Mercedes' encouragement, he joined Ray Bauer's firm, specializing in cases involving financial fraud and family deception. His office in the legal aid building had become a beacon of hope for people facing situations similar to what his family had endured. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the playground, a new addition funded by the settlement from Patterson's latest conviction. Eleanor had finally served her 5-year sentence for fraud and bigamy, emerging from prison a changed woman. Her attempts at reconciliation had been met with cautious acceptance by Christopher, though their relationship remained carefully bounded by the truth they'd all learned. Trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt only through consistent honesty and genuine remorse. Leonard's phone buzzed, a message from Kent. "Retirement party still on for Saturday?" "Trina's making her famous lasagna." Kent and Trina had remained pillars of support through the years. Their retirement from active volunteering marked the end of an era, but their impact on the center would endure through the programs they'd helped establish. A knock at the door interrupted Leonard's reply. Mercedes Lawson-Mills, now a respected judge like her mother, stood in the doorway, her prosecutor's confidence temporarily replaced by nervous excitement. "Chris asked me to come get you both," she said, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "The twins are here." Leonard's heart still squeezed at the mention of Christopher's half-brothers, though time had softened the pain. Now 18, James and Michael Patterson had sought out their older brother 2 years ago, after learning the full truth about their parents' deceptions. The relationship had developed slowly, built on honesty rather than the elaborate lies of their childhood. In the garden courtyard, Christopher sat with his brothers on the same bench where he'd once counseled his first young client. The physical resemblance between the three was striking, though their lives had taken vastly different paths. The twins, rejecting their father's tainted wealth, had chosen public service careers. James in teaching, Michael in emergency medicine. "Dad," Christopher called out, standing. "The boys have some news." Stuart Patterson's downfall had been spectacular and complete. His scheme of using multiple families to build his fortune had finally unraveled, revealing a pattern spanning decades. The investigation triggered by Leonard's case had uncovered 6 other families, each manipulated through a similar combination of bigamy, fraud, and emotional exploitation. Patterson now served a 30-year sentence. His empire of lies collapsed into asset seizures and restitution payments. Eleanor, released from prison 3 years ago, worked at a women's shelter in another state. Her letters to Christopher showed genuine remorse, though the trust fund promises and luxury gifts had been replaced by simple birthday cards and honest acknowledgments of her failures. She never remarried, focusing instead on counseling other women away from paths similar to the one she'd chosen. "We're starting a scholarship," James announced, handing Leonard a folder. "The Redemption Fund. 4 kids affected by financial fraud and family deception. We're using our trust funds. What's left of them after the government seizures." Michael nodded. It felt wrong keeping any of that money. "This way, something good can come from it." Grace squeezed Leonard's hand as he studied the proposal. A decade ago, these boys had been unwitting pawns in their parents' scheme. Now they sat in the garden of the center that had grown from those ashes, choosing to transform their inheritance of lies into a legacy of truth. Mercedes joined them, settling next to Christopher with the easy familiarity of 15 years of marriage. Their first child would be born into a family built on honest foundations, a stark contrast to the deceptions that had marked Christopher's own youth. Judge Lawson approved our expansion proposal, Mercedes said, passing Christopher a thick envelope. The satellite centers can open next spring. What had started as one family's journey through betrayal had grown into a network of support spanning 3 states. The Willow Grove model of combining legal aid, counseling, and community support had proven so successful that similar centers were being established across the country. Kent and Trina arrived with coffee and pastries from the center's cafe, another of their successful initiatives. The cafe provided job training for clients rebuilding their lives, its profits supporting the center's programs. Got the final numbers for the annual report, Ken announced proudly. Over 500 families helped this year alone. Leonard looked around the garden at the living testament to resilience they'd built together. The pain of betrayal had transformed into purpose, the wounds of deception healed into wisdom shared with others. His family, though different from what he'd once imagined, had grown stronger through truth rather than illusion. The twins' scholarship announcement made headlines in the local papers, their rejection of Patterson's tainted legacy seen as final proof that cycles of deception could be broken. Christopher's legal work continued to expose similar schemes, each case adding to the center's understanding of how to help families heal. Ray Bowers, semi-retired but still involved in the center's legal program, often said that the greatest victory wasn't just winning the case against Patterson and Eleanor. It was building something meaningful from the wreckage of their deceptions. Grace's counseling programs had expanded to include preventive education in schools, teaching young people about healthy relationships and financial responsibility. The garden where they now sat had become a symbol of growth and healing, its paths walked by countless families finding their way back to trust. As the sun set over Willow Grove, casting long shadows across the grounds where so many stories of betrayal had transformed into tales of redemption, Leonard remembered Grace's words from their first meeting. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. 10 years later, he understood the full truth of that statement. The end of his marriage to Eleanor had begun a journey that touched hundreds of lives. The collapse of Patterson's schemes had created space for genuine relationships to grow. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into a mission of healing that would outlast them all. Christopher's voice pulled Leonard back to the present. "We're naming her Grace," he told the gathered family, his hand resting on Mercedes' belly. "After the woman who taught us that healing is possible." Grace Singmill smiled, tears in her eyes. "And we'll make sure she knows the whole story, not just the pain, but the healing. Not just the betrayal, but the rebuilding." Leonard looked at his expanded family, his son and daughter-in-law, his wife, the twins who'd found their way to truth, Kent and Trina who'd stood by them through everything, and saw not what he'd lost, but what they'd all gained. Their family might not look like what he'd once expected, but it was real, built on foundations of truth that no deception could shake. The garden lights came on automatically, illuminating the path for evening support group members arriving for their weekly meeting. Another group of people beginning their journey from betrayal to healing, finding their way back to trust one honest step at a time. In the gentle evening light, Leonard saw his life's second act for what it was, not a story of loss and betrayal, but one of redemption and rebuilding. The lies that had shattered his world had led to truths that helped heal others. The pain that had broken his family had created space for a larger, stronger one to grow. The center's motto, carved into the garden's entrance stone, caught the last rays of sunlight. From deception to truth, from betrayal to trust, every ending is a new beginning. And in that moment, surrounded by the family he'd rebuilt and the legacy they'd created together, Leonard knew that sometimes the best chapters of our stories come after what we think is the end. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.